There's a question I want you to sit with before we go any further. Think about the last time you did something kind when absolutely no one was watching, not when someone was nearby, not when there was a camera, a comment section, or even a friend to tell later. Truly alone, no audience whatsoever. What did you do? Because that moment, that specific, invisible moment, says more about who you actually are than almost anything else in your life. And today, I want to explore why, because there is a rich, deeply fascinating body of psychological research on everyday kindness, what it does to your brain, what it reveals about your character, and why it might be one of the most important psychological resources you have, whether you realize it or not. I'm Sergiu Popovici. I'm a licensed psychologist based in Munich, and this is one of those topics I genuinely love talking about because it sits right at the intersection of neuroscience, character, identity, and what it means to be a decent human being. Let's start at the beginning. What is everyday kindness exactly? When psychologists talk about kindness in research settings, they use the term prosocial behavior. It means any voluntary action intended to benefit someone else. Sharing your notes with a classmate, holding the door, letting someone go ahead of you in line, checking in on a friend who seems off, leaving a generous tip after a long meal. Nothing dramatic, nothing that makes the news. Just the small, daily texture of how you move through the world in relation to other people. And here's what struck me when I first started reading this literature seriously. These small acts turn out to matter enormously, not just morally, neurologically, physically, psychologically. Let's talk about your brain on kindness. Because what happens inside your skull when you do something kind is genuinely remarkable. When you engage in an act of generosity or help someone in need, your brain's reward circuitry activates. We're talking about the same as the limbic system that lights up when you receive money, eat something delicious, or experience something pleasurable. A study published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences using brain imaging technology confirmed that charitable giving activates this euphoric dopamine response in much the same way that anticipating a financial reward does. In other words, your brain treats being kind as a reward, not just giving one. This is what researchers call the helper's high, and it's not a metaphor. It's a measurable neurological state. Your brain releases a combination of dopamine, serotonin, and oxytocin, what some researchers call the happiness trifecta. Each one plays a distinct role. Dopamine is your brain's reinforcement signal. It says, "That felt good. Do it again." It literally trains your brain to repeat the behavior. Serotonin helps regulate your mood. It's what most antidepressants try to boost pharmacologically. Kindness does it naturally. And then there's oxytocin, the bonding hormone. It's released during physical touch, during deep eye contact, during moments of real human connection. And research shows it's also released when you perform or even witness an act of kindness. Oxytocin reduces anxiety, lowers blood pressure, promotes trust, and creates a felt sense of belonging and warmth. One cardiologist at Cedars-Sinai described it this way: oxytocin causes the release of nitric oxide in your blood vessels, which dilates them and directly reduces blood pressure. That's why kindness is sometimes described as cardioprotective. It literally protects your heart. So the next time someone tells you that kindness is soft or sentimental, you can tell them it's also biochemistry. But let's go deeper, because this is where it gets psychologically interesting. A 2024 study published in Social and Personality Psychology Compass followed 193 university students over 6 weeks using a diary method. Every week, students checked which prosocial actions they had performed from a list of 47 everyday behaviors, things like sharing notes, holding a door, helping a stranger. The results were striking. Students experienced significantly higher well-being across measures of happiness, flourishing, resilience, optimism, and reduced loneliness during the weeks when they were more kind to others, not in weeks when good things happened to them, in weeks when they were kind to others. And this wasn't a one-off finding. A study by researchers at UCLA and UC Riverside directly compared people assigned to perform acts of kindness toward others versus people assigned to engage in self-focused well-being activities. Those who focused on others showed greater improvements in mood and psychological flourishing. Research from the University of California, Berkeley, found that about half of participants in kindness studies reported feeling more energetic and stronger after helping others, and many reported feeling calmer and less depressed. Kindness, it turns out, is one of the most effective psychological interventions we have, and it's free. Now I want to come back to the question I asked at the beginning, because this is where we move from neuroscience into something I find even more compelling: the psychology of character and identity. Who are you when no one is watching? Psychologists Carl Aquino and Americus Reed identified what they call moral identity, the degree to which being a moral person is central to your sense of self. And they found two distinct dimensions of it. The first is internalization. This is your private moral self. How deeply traits like compassion, honesty, fairness, and kindness are woven into your actual self-concept, not your public image, your actual inner sense of who you are. A person high in internalization doesn't need an audience. They act from an internal standard, not an external one. The second dimension is symbolization. This is the public display of morality, the visible signals, the affiliations, the actions others can see. And this isn't inherently negative. But research shows that symbolization, when it operates without internalization, can slide into what's known as impression management, performing goodness rather than living it. In a world of social media, this distinction has never been more important. Research by Harvard psychologist Gillian Jordan found that most people retain some motivation to appear moral even in anonymous settings, but that motivation drops significantly when there is genuinely no audience. The behavior changes. That gap between who you are when you're observed and who you are when you're not is one of the most revealing psychological measurements there is. And here's what the research consistently shows. People who are high in moral identity internalization, people for whom kindness is genuinely part of who they are, not something they perform, show consistent prosocial behavior regardless of who's watching. Their character doesn't fluctuate based on the audience. It stays stable. There's something else I want to address, because it comes up often in therapy. The question of whether kindness is authentic or strategic. Can you be kind and also benefit from it? Does the fact that kindness makes you feel good make it somehow less genuine? This is actually a false dichotomy, and psychology has answered it clearly. In a landmark study from the University of Basel, published in Nature Scientific Reports, researchers developed a 15-minute psychological microintervention designed to promote prosocial behavior in couples. Across two studies, the intervention increased prosocial behaviors by 28% and decreased selfish behaviors by 35%, not just in the lab, but measured in real life over the following week. What this tells us is that prosocial behavior can be cultivated. It can be practiced, like a muscle. And the more you practice it, the more natural it becomes, until eventually it stops feeling like an effort and starts feeling like an expression of who you are. That's how character works. Character isn't something you have. It's something you build through repeated choices, especially the ones no one sees. Yale psychologist Akash Chaukes put it this way: personality is who we are on a typical day. Character is who we are on a difficult day. Being kind to a colleague when you're frustrated, stressed, or running late, that's a test of character. And every time you pass that test, you strengthen something inside yourself. Now, let's talk about something that I think is one of the most beautiful findings in this entire field. Kindness is contagious, not metaphorically. Literally, this was studied rigorously by Dr. Jamil Zaki, professor of psychology at Stanford and director of the Social Neuroscience Laboratory. In a series of studies, Zaki and his colleagues found that people don't even need to see someone perform a kind act directly. Simply learning that others around them had behaved generously was enough to increase their own generosity, and not just in the same way. People imitated the spirit of the kindness, not just the form of it. One person's act of generosity inspired a completely different kind act in someone else. Zaki calls this positive conformity. Kindness, he argues, can cascade across people and communities, taking on new forms along the way. And UCLA's Bidari Kindness Institute took this further. In a study involving 8,000 participants across 15 separate experiments, researchers found that simply watching a video of someone performing small, ordinary acts of kindness was enough to trigger prosocial behavior in observers. Participants who watched the kindness video donated significantly more to charity than those who watched a neutral video. The effect was replicated both online and in face-to-face settings on the streets of Los Angeles. The emotion that drives this is what researchers call elevation, a warm, uplifting feeling you get in your chest when you witness something morally beautiful. That feeling isn't passive. It moves you toward action. It makes you want to do something kind yourself, which means that every act of kindness you perform, even the ones no one notices, sends invisible ripples outward. You may never see them, but they are there. I want to close with something personal. In my work as a psychologist, I've sat with people who are exhausted, people who feel invisible, disconnected, like nothing they do really matters. And one of the things I come back to again and again, not as a platitude, but as a clinically grounded observation, is this: the people who feel most purposeful and most alive are often not the ones who have received the most. They are the ones who have given consistently, quietly, without needing it acknowledged. There is a version of you that exists only when no one is watching. That version is your actual self. And according to the research, your actual self is the one that determines your mental health, your relationships, your sense of identity, and even your physical well-being. So who are you when no one is watching? That's not a rhetorical question. I genuinely encourage you to sit with it this week. And if you find the answer isn't quite what you'd hoped for, that's okay. Character isn't fixed. It's built, one invisible act at a time. If this resonated with you, subscribe. I publish new psychology content every week. And if you're based in Munich or interested in working with me directly, my consultation details are in the description below. I'll see you in the next one.